So there's a basic question regarding the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which, and it's part of being a basic question. It's interesting to notice and important to notice how little of it is asked, especially in earlier sources. You could find some Mamre Chazal that might be referring to this question, but it doesn't become central. It doesn't become central till very late. Maybe in medieval times, in Rishonim, you could find some people discussing this somewhat, like in a derech agavdig way. But mainly, it becomes a very important question in early modern times, in the beginning of Achronim, in the times of Arizal, slightly before him. We see people very worried about this question. It's somewhat in the Zohar. There's earlier sources, and it would be interesting to trace how exactly people get worried by it. But Arizal gets very worried about it, and his generation in general are very worried by this question. You could read in Al-Shech at very length. You could read in other sources of the period. Most people who discuss this question start with those sources. So that seems to be the primary place where people ask it. And the question is that it's all very nice that we got out of Mitzrayim, but how did we get into it? Or why did we get into it? Usually the question is framed in this language of reward and punishment. What did we do wrong? What did we do to deserve the Golus in Mitzrayim? Right? The harsh conditions of Mitzrayim. And of course, it's a very new question, and in another way, a very old question. I mean, we have the whole story of the end of Sefer Bereshis, the whole story of Yosef, which is really how we got into Mitzrayim, right? It's not like there isn't an account, there isn't a story of how we got into Mitzrayim, but it's generally not. We don't start Pesach with Yosef. We do sometimes start with Yaakov going down to Mitzrayim, but we don't really give the context of why this happened. Of course, you could blame it on Mechiras Yosef. That's a big chet, maybe. There's such a medrash, maybe in some sense. But in the most general sense of like, what is the reason for Galus Mitzrayim? In other words, what really the question, this is the way it's framed, but really the question is not like some kind of lamdisha question, like, okay, what did they do wrong? We need to find the pshat. That's what the Chazal that seem to refer to this question are doing. But I don't think that's what the Achronim that refer to this question are doing. And even the Zohar already, the question that's bothering them is really, by analogy, to every other Galus, especially the one which we're in right now, or that they found themselves in right at that moment. And it seems like if Yetzias Mitzrayim, or Egypt, is only like one detail, it's only one prat, it's only one specific Galus. But there's generally this concept of Galus, there's a concept of Galus for the Jewish people, there's a concept of Galus for the Shekhinah, which might be the same or might be a different thing. And this needs to be explained. What is it all about? Why would that happen? One way of saying it is, what did we do wrong? But that's just assuming a certain framework of explaining things by what we did wrong, and that itself needs to be explained as in how does that help, right? Another way of maybe framing the same question, I think it's almost the same question, is who cares about Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? And the question that Arizal frames it in Shara Mitzvahs and Parshas Re'eh as, why is the Torah so worried about Yetzias Mitzrayim? And he explicitly frames it like this. The question he asks is, well, there's a lot of gulas and a lot of gula. Like, we've got many problems. There have been many problems in history. We've been saved from many problems, even many exiles, literal exiles, right? We've been in many places. The Jewish people have been in many places. Humanity has been in many places. And we've got out of many bad places. Sometimes we get into new bad places. So what's this big deal of like, remember Mitzrayim every day, remember Mitzrayim every year? Like, okay, and maybe remember Bavel, maybe remember Yavan, maybe remember some other random place where we were. It seems to be something important for him to ask this question. And really, and I should go one meta level beyond both of these questions and explain, as I explained in the meaning of these questions himself, what they're really being bothered by is coming out of a certain shared assumption behind both of these questions, which is that it can't be just a story that happened, right? It can't have been an accident in the ancient, in the philosophical sense, meaning something that just happened, right? It just happened that this people came out of Egypt, they're once there, and that's where the story started, That's why we talk about, like we ask us where we are from or what we're at, where you from. The answer is from Egypt. Yeah. Where's the Torah from? Well, it's from Egypt. It's from the God that took us out of Egypt. That's the answer to where it's from, where you're from, in the Torah and the Pshat. But that can't be. Right? That's the basic assumption. And it can't be, and one simple way of showing that it can't be is that we see this same pattern. The same pattern is repeating itself, right? We were in Mitzrayim, and that's just one of the stories, right? And the question which says, well, we're in Mitzrayim, we're in a bunch of different places, why is this one more important? Especially now, maybe at one point it was, but now that we were in different places, why is that one still important? Why do we frame our story in terms of yetzias Mitzrayim? Why do we still discuss this? Is assuming that there is something shared between Mitzrayim and these others, right? If the pshat of yetzias Mitzrayim, if people would be happy with saying, well, Mitzrayim was the first one, Mitzrayim was the one that was in the times of the Torah, so therefore we'll make a big deal out of it, because it happens to be that things that happened 3,000 years ago got a chapter in the Bible, and afterward that we stopped writing the Bible. Those are not very good answers for people who share this basic assumption. And really, the basic assumption, going back to the previous class, or the preface, which is that's true. It's true in the literal sense. It's true in the physical sense of the world. This is what happened. Happens to be that it happened, but that's not very interesting for people that are trying to get to the broader patterns, right? To the broader structures underlying reality, and the broader structures underlying history, and the broader structures underlying the story of humanity, or the story of each human. So you could see that since this is a very general, this question, it's a general principle. So then the question of why we call it by the name of Mitzrayim becomes a question, right? Or since there's a general principle of Gulas that needs to be explained, right? That needs to be explained on the general level, on the most abstract or most biggest, greatest level, just that the level that encompasses the most. And then we might be able to understand maybe Mitzrayim symbolizes that level, maybe other differences between Mitzrayim and other situations and other Gulas, but that has to be explained. And of course, it's only by understanding things on the higher level, on the higher conceptual level, that they can then be applied, right? And this is like we start. This is definitely one of the things that motivate us when we want to understand things on the broader, higher, more general level. The motivation is to be able to apply it, right? To be able to use it. But it's not because we have something against just history, or it's not because we have something against just metaphysics, right? Or just theory. It's the opposite. Theory is the only way, or in other sense, higher theory is the only way in which you can apply it. Because as long as Mitzrayim would be is a story that just happened to happen. So all right, it happened to us, and that makes it quite interesting. But even that doesn't make it explain what's happening to us today, right? It explains what happened to us then, which is somehow where we started, and we can give all kinds of explanations. Well, if we would have stayed in Mitzrayim, then nothing would have started, and it would have still be there, and something. There would be some alternative historical timeline, which is all like, okay. But if you understand the most general principles, or the most abstract principles, the intellectual principles behind it, then we'll be able to actually apply it now. And of course, not in the precisely same way, because it's just an application of the same principle, but it doesn't need to express itself, doesn't need to happen the same way. One of the things that he likes thinking is God doesn't repeat himself, doesn't literally just have eternal return. That's not what he thinks. But there are general principles that underlie all the things that happen. So that's why we need to understand it on this level. Now, our third thing, and very important, now this is where you can't say it differently, I think, and definitely not for the Arizal. What comes out of this general principle, which makes these two questions very salient, is a third principle, which is that this can't be the story of the Jews. And the Arizal starts, and this is unlike the Gemara, unlike the both Gersos in the Talmud, where do you start from Terach, do you start from Avram, do you start from Maisha? They're two very important shittas in Medrash and Chazal. The Arizal would answer the question that no, you want to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and he literally does in Shar Kevanis, where he tells the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim in his version. And there's people, Ramchal wrote a poem for Pesach night, and it literally starts from the Demolition. There are other poems from early Mekabalim, students of the Arizal, which wrote the story. What's a poetry? What's piyut? What's poems for Yom Tov? It's people retelling the story in ways that make sense for them and ways that rhyme to them, right? And they all start from a Demolition. Of course, the Arizal starts the Shana from a Demolition, that everyone agrees with. But he starts Pesach. The story of Pesach that he starts from a Demolition. And what this means is, and this is because of the same reason, because we can't have it being a particular story that happened to happen. It could be particular, but there needs to be a general principle behind it. So it's not really the story of a people, right? It's the story of people, right? Of humans. And what we talk about Demolition is just the way of saying Demolition, literally translated, right? The first human. The first human that Arizal understands him to be not only the first. Again, if it would just have happened to be the first, that's not very interesting. Happening to be the first, okay, so he came before us. It's a shame I wasn't born before him. But he sees him as the first metaphysically. He sees him, Demolition, as the first kind of human, right? So the first, in other words, the first cause or the first principle of humanity is what we call a demolition. And we could even talk about a demolition alien, Adam Kadman or Adam Datzilis or however, which really is what demolition would mean. But at least for humanity, we talk about the demolition, at least whether the literal physical one or the concept that he represents, the kind of human, but doesn't matter. The point is, this is a story about humans, and it needs to be understood not about specific humans, which of course it is, but about humanity, right? About the first human, about the first thing that can be said about humans. Okay, so that's the three points that I seem to see, which lead Arizal to start his story in a totally different place, and it starts from a demolition. Now, there's a lot of choice. We have a lot of choice what to talk about a demolition. There's a short parsha in Parshas Bereshis about him, but a lot of different stories told about him in the Medrash, a lot of different theories that Arizal in Shara Psukim in Parshas Bereshis gives 7 or 8 or 11 different meanings of the Chet Demolition in Kabbalah, right? Only in what kind of pgam, what kind of mistake did he have, what kind of move did he do wrong in the spheres, which we call Chet Demolition, right? And all of that doesn't include what he's talking about in Pesach, so there's even more. And there's even more than that. If you read Shara Gilgulim, in other places, he gives even more. There are probably like 25 theories of Chet Demolition and of Demolition in the Arizal. And the choice of what to talk about is important. The choice of which part of this to talk about is important. It's not clear to me what necessitates the different choices where he talks about different aspects and different times and different mitzvahs and different things. There's probably a reason for that. I don't know what it is right now. But importantly, and I can understand why he picks out this story for the story of Mitzrayim, for the story of Pesach. He picks out a very weird story to start, but we could again try to think of this more generally. He picks out the question of Adam Rishon having children. Okay, so again, we could think of Adam Rishon for himself, right? The first person. So he was supposed to not eat yetzias, and he did eat it. Or was supposed to do other things and didn't do them, or did do them. All kind of. The Gemara sometimes has lists, and also Arizal quotes it in Sanhedrin. Adam Rishon did this wrong, did that wrong. All right. But that's not really interesting for us, at least for us, in the sense that we think about the mitzrayim, which is the sense of creating a people, right? The story of Yetzias Mitzrayim starts, Vnei Yisrael, Paru vayishritzu vayirbu vayatzmu, which of course references Ve'emer lehem elihim prerve, right? So the first thing that God told humans when he created them was to multiply, to be fruitful, to multiply. In other words, to have children, to create families, to create nations, to do a lot of humans, right? And we see the same thing after the Mabel, right? We see repeats this bracha or this mitzvah, and we see it, of course, in Avram Avinu, where he gets the bracha that Avram Avinu gets is to have children, and this goes through until Mitzrayim. There's like Pari doesn't like it, so it's very clear that the first problem Pari has, the first problem that where he gets stuck over, there's a problem. The Pari says, there are too many, there's too many of them. There's something wrong with there being too many, like it's a demographic threat. But again, reading it in a more general way, we say it's a great thing. Humans need to have a bunch of children. That's what humans are for. We could ask the question. So if a demolition was supposed to live forever, why does he need children? The Gemara in Avodah Zarah says this question. Says, well, thankfully he did sin and he did die. So it's otherwise we'd all be like around the demolition and wouldn't count. Nobody would look at us. There'd be a demolition there still. But more generally, Okay, so that's one question. But it's clear that humans were not meant to live out there alone, right? There was Chava in the first moment. Of course, the story of giving birth to Chava, we talk about Rosh Hashanah. Um, but the story of Adam having children is like one of the most important things, maybe the important thing he has to do, or the first important thing a human has to do, and that's like one definition of humans, or of all biological things, but of humans in the human way, is to reproduce and to have children and reproduce in their likeness, right? As the pasuk is madgash, and this is where the problem comes in. And like it says in the third time, I think, where it says "Tell this Adam," it says "V'yelet kid misa v'ketsalmai." And in other words, a human needs to give birth to children, but he needs to give birth to human children. If he would give birth to non-human children or to human children which are not really actually human or doesn't act like human, then that doesn't count. And of course, when Pari says there are too many humans, he seems to say, well, these people, there's too many, and we could say they're lacking some humanity. So part of being human is having some connection with other humans, or creating a culture, creating a society, creating a politics, right? A palace. And if there are too many, well, Pari has a specific problem again, but reading him in more general, there is a problem with there being too many. Like sometimes people say there's too many humans. In other words, we don't know what all these humans are for, right? If there's 5 humans in the town, we know one guy is the police officer, one guy is the fireman, one guy is the garbage collector. Okay, we know what they're for. And then there's so many, and we don't know what they're for. Like nowadays, people say there's too many humans sometimes, or there's too few jobs, right? Too few jobs is just another way of saying too many humans, right? Too few jobs. Okay, so what are the extra people going to do? What are the extra humans going to do? We don't know what they're for. They're just consuming and they're not producing. They're not doing like what their function. What are they for? And that's a big problem. Humans that we don't know what they're for are basically not humans, right? Everything is defined by what it's for or what it does. So Demolition, or the first human giving birth, is not a simple thing. And that's why, I mean, of course, we see in the others that were not able to have children, all or most of them, or at least all the Himayas, or all the important ones, seem to have issues with fertility. Fertility becomes a big problem. In other words, when you want to try to have children in the correct way, then suddenly you see that it's a challenge. That's not like, well, let's just have children as many as it goes. That's not a good idea. You need to know what you're doing, and if you want to know what you're doing, then of course you realize that you don't know what you're doing, and that's what's called Vati Surah Akura, Vati Rachel Akura, Ifka Akura. That's basically what it means. So we can go back. So this is the first thing. This is the first point of yetzias mitzrayim and the pshat, and this is why the Arizal right away thinks of something very, very important about the Demolition. So the story or the medrash that expresses this in the best way, and it's a medrash on this pasuk. Vayoled b'dmusa ketzalma, vaychi adam shloshim ma'as shanu vayoled b'dmusa ketzalma v'yikras shmoi shais. Says the medrash. There's something weird, and if you read the continuation, it doesn't say b'dmusa ketzalma, right? Shais had a son. It doesn't say b'dmusa ketzalma, and so on. So it's important in other words, you might have said that Adam gave birth not b'dmusa ketzalma. Well, he gave birth to something, he reproduced, but not human really reproduced. And then finally, after 130 years, there was Shais, and he was b'dmusa ketzalma. And so, of course, there are 3 things that we can think about here in this story. There was Cain and Hevel, right? Cain and Hevel are in the earlier story. They don't count here because the pasuk is trying to get to Noach and to Avram Avinu from that. So Cain and Hevel are not the real ancestors. They're not the real humans who count in this story. But of course, there's Cain and Hevel, and it's quite easy to see that Cain and Hevel are somewhat not b'dmusa ketzalma, right? Cain is a murderer, and we see Cain right away saying, "I will be murdered," right? In other words, don't feel fully human. In other words, because humans obviously are not afraid of being killed. That's like we see it after the Bible also. If you're human, then you have some kind of image of God in you. Of course, that doesn't die, right? So, but since Cain ruined that, right? So he ruined that, and he felt like he lost that. So now he's just like an animal. Now I'm free. Now anyone that sees me is going to kill me. So God gave him a ois. Maybe we could read it as some kind of like one letter or a sign, so he won't be killed. And Hevel, of course, is the one that got killed. Maybe he was better than Cain. At least he was the person murdered and not the murderer. But he's not with the Misa Ketzalma. Like the first thing is you have to survive, right? you don't survive, you get murdered, and he might have gotten murdered for somewhat a good reason or somewhat his fault. In any case, that's not what we're looking for. Now there's a third thing. So there's like a weird gap of 130 years. Of course, it's true for all the people that are in that list. They all give birth at late ages, about 100, most of them. But there's this gap of 130 years between the story of Cain and Abel, which seems to have taken place the first day or right away, or at least isn't said in the Torah the first time, and Shais. And for this, there's a Gemara in Erevin, which gives a very interesting pshat. And the Gemara says that for 130 years, a Demolition was moiled, not bid musik etzalme. Now, what but not bid musik etzalme? The Gemara calls it shedim velilin. Okay, shedim velilin are demons and women demons, right? Girl demons, and that's what he gave birth to. And demons are basically what the concept, right? There's this whole like controversy for some reason and about demons. Do they exist? Do they not exist? I don't know. But the meaning about the symbolism, the concept, what the concept of a shed is basically, and we see this all the time in Jas and talked about it in the Shana Rabbi, I think, the concept of a shed is something that is a human but not human, right? Or that's why the Rambam, who famously doesn't believe in demons, once said that, yeah, a stupid person or an unfulfilled person is actually a demon. And even the Rambam said that, and there's a in Perek Zayin about Yeled, about he references this pasuk and this medrash and this idea, and he gives this pshat, and also in Perek Chelagil, Perek Mavov, where he talks about people zivchem l'shedim. He says the shedim and those who are really shedim, or in Arabic the plan word seems to work better because someone who's crazy is called like someone majnun, or someone has a jinn, right? The jinn is a shed. So majnun is someone who's taken by a shed. So he said you're really majnun and the jinn, they're the same thing. But this is the true concept. This is, you could say, okay, so therefore there's no shedim, only this concept, but it's the concept of the reality too. The concept, and we see it from this pasuk. A human who is not a full human, who is not with musik etzalme, right, is a shed, or shedim velilim. That's what they are. In other words, and like we see described about shedim in Chazal, in many places, it's like if someone is pretending to be a human, or something that can pretend to be a human, but is missing something, right? Doesn't have a soul, or sometimes it says it doesn't have a second shadow, right? Whatever that's supposed to mean. Doesn't have 3 dimensions, I think is what it means. It seems to be a human, but it's not really a human. So that's a prime example of a man, the human, giving birth to people who are not human. It's very sad. And then the Gemara has a discussion of how we gave birth to those. Now, this is very interesting. So this is the first step in the Gemara in Erevin Daf Yud Ches. And then the Gemara says, okay, but how did this happen? So was it with Chava that he gave birth to these shedim? That seems to be the first reading of it. And there were some Rishonim that understood that to be the pshat. There's a shtickle from Rav Eigun, I think. He said, yeah, sometimes we see it in Nida. Sometimes women give birth to like monsters and stuff. So in other words, this is what it means. That's the concept. That's what a shed is according to him. So that's his like rationalization. But the Gemara then goes on to say that can't be, because we have a medrash from Rav Meir. Rav Meir said that the Demolition, since he did the chet of Demolition, he was Pirish Maisha. He was separated from his wife. Seems like to the tshuva. We have like Tanis, like Ayim Kippur, we have Issa Tash Mishamita. So whatever the reason of it, it's like a sigaf, or there's other deeper reasons for it. Point is, since the Demolition did this chet, so for 130 years he was fasting and didn't touch Chava. So now the question was, if he didn't touch Chava, how did he have these Shedin and Lilim? And the Gemara answers, so since he was a human being, and it's all very nice to not live with your wife, but you will still have Keri. And from that Keri, somehow, were born Shedim. And the Zohar, I think, and definitely the Arizal, very much like this story, very much understand this story, because for them, and again, I'm going to abstract it a bit, we talk about a human who is not a human, or a humanity who doesn't succeed, right? Having children who, like so we say on someone who is worthy to be born, Ashrei Yeladite, right? Worthy is his mother. It was Kedai, it was worth it for that human to be born. And if some woman was not worth it to be born, so that's basically what we call Sera Levatala. That's a shame that he was born, right? And the Arizal understands this very clearly, because this is how he understands everything. That is precisely the same thing as saying seed which did not enter to a woman. Because basically and one way of saying this is that he sees the full. I'm going to describe it like this: the fullness or the completion, biological completion, has to at least has to be able to encompass the entire completion of a human being. In other words, a complete human can be described as a complete body. Of course, the soul works in the same way as the body and the same pattern, so it's the same thing. But we can describe it as a complete body. And since he sees, this is sort of biologically true, that a seed is a potential human, right, with different kinds of potential, but at least how it exactly works, embryology and all of that, is not exactly accurate, but there is at least, it's potentially a full human, at least halfway is potentially a full human, or somewhat potentially a full human. So that is exactly what it means. It's like a physical image. It's physically what it is to be able, like, have the capacity or the ability to be human, but not manage to be human. And in continuing our metaphor, and since Arizal could remain completely in the physical metaphor, one of the greatnesses of a system is that it doesn't jump between levels. If we're speaking in a metaphor, we could complete the metaphor entirely. So if we're still remaining in the same exact metaphor, we will say that how does a seed get completed? In other words, how do humans develop into full humans? Well, obviously by having the seed going to the womb of a woman and having everything that happens there, all the 9 months of pregnancy and the whole Chad Gadya that happens over there. That is how humans get completed. Of course, that itself has meanings and meanings of meanings, but that's how. In other words, if it did not go into the womb of a woman, then it's basically a shed. It's by itself a shed. That's just a shed. And of course, there's like a more mythical way and more literal way of saying this, which is that since a human woman didn't receive it, so some non-human woman will receive it. And the way it's seen is like when people have carry at night or in a dream, so you would have often an image in your dream, and the question would be like, who is that image? And since these are realist people, we don't believe that it's just your mind making it up, or even if it is your mind making it up, where did your mind get it from? And in the broader sense, it has to be basically a demon. It has to be basically some kind of real being who came to you in a dream and made you have that emission. And therefore, that's the story of Lilith, right? And Nama and different names that they have, which are those women that come to men at night and make them have carry. And that's basically the story of Demolition. That's the story. So Demolition, in these 130 years, had a bunch of children, who knows how many, a bunch of children who are not human children, they're demon children. And of course, every person has the same story when he has carry. But of course, if you have Demolition, it's a more important story. Because again, when we talk about Demolition, we're not speaking about a particular human named Mr. Adam, we're talking about the human. In other words, this is talking about the fact that for 130 years, which is a long time, even in those days, even if you live 900 years, it's a big part of his life, it's a whole decade, right? He didn't manage to figure out what he was. And he was doing tshuva, he was like, well, I did this chet, and I wanted to be a Demolition, and then I turned out not to be a Demolition. Because I ate from that tzadas, and now I'm not in Gan Eden, but I'm trying to do tshuva, what am I going to do? How do I get back to it? And part of this getting back to it, he's not managing, right? Didn't figure out any way to like make some kind of compromise. Maybe there's a second way to be a Adam. Maybe there's a way to have shais outside of Gan Eden, which he figured out after 130 years. After 130 years, didn't figure that out. And since then, this is how the Arizal's description. Since then, there are these shedim flying around in the world. They're people. And again, the souls, we have to take out the story of like there being external shedim here, because in the Arizal story itself, they become gilgulim of people. In other words, there's a bunch of souls. The Demolition gives birth to a bunch of souls. Of course, there's Shais, who's like the one normal guy, knows how to live in this world. But there's thousands and millions and who knows how many of more people. And those people still have the power and they still have the energy of a Demolition. They have the potential of being human. And Arizal goes further to say that they have more potential, or they have higher level of Demolition than the Shais that was born after. And he gives specifics for this theory because there's das, and Yechidim come from, the Neshamas come from das, but Neshamas that come from Keri come from higher level of das, or das Elyon, or higher part of das, and those are these Neshamas. But in the most basic sense, the way I read it is, or one way I can read it is, and of course, Shais is when he had these great dreams, and then the tried to the tshuva, and the tshuva itself led to all of these problems, because it's just basically being confused and being not sure where he is. But at some point, he figured his life out, and he settled down, and Feyeda the Moedes Ishta, right? And okay, he goes back, and he has Shais, and that's like, okay, we settled down. But the part of him who's not settled down still exists, right? Then all those souls, all those people, all those kinds of people, there's a certain kind of people, who did not figure out how to settle down, and they still have parts of the Demolition in them, right? They still have parts of the dream of what kind of humans we could give birth to, what kind of humans we could create here. And that's part of the world. And this is why, and it's very important, this is why the world is not stable. Like we talk about Shnei Aleph and Toyu, right? The world, until we get to Mitzrayim, is very unstable. And again, I guess if you read Sefer Bereshis, that's your impression you get, right? 1 week there's a Mabel, another week there's Dara Fluga, another week there's Siddim, and not even getting to all the family politics that they had between the Ovis and so on. But even which is already the story of one family. But it's never okay, right? Then you get it to Mitzrayim, there's never trouble. So this world is not a stable world, and there's not even like a story, there's like there's not like there's one people, like we always have, there's Noach, but he was saved by also like just Bechesed, Chen, and so on. There's no normal world. And this is like the bubbling. There all these things that the Demolition gave birth to, they're bubbling around and they're trying. One day they're trying to be Dara Mabel, and that's one kind of mistake. Another time they're trying to be Dara Fluga, and that's another kind of mistake. Another time they're trying to be Saddam, that's another type of mistake. Basically until Avraham Avinu. And Avraham Avinu is the one that starts, and of course makes his own mistakes. And the Arizal gives this really radical pshat, and he says, why did the Dara Mabel do that? And of course, one of the big problems of the Dara Mabel is exactly Zerel Vatula, as it says in the Gemara, and his Kiyeshches Kalbasar is darker, more general, Znes is more general, but all of them can be traced back to something like this. And he says, of course, because that's who you are. This is like a Gilgal theory, but it's something that he takes very seriously. In other words, since the Demolition, since Chet Demolition, where whatever original plan there might have been, whether there could have been such a plan or not is a different discussion, doesn't exist anymore. But we still have the broken dreams. We still have a bunch of broken yetzias keri, which are humans. All humans are basically that. Well, there might be some humans that have just a normal life and they don't have any problems. But the humans that are, doing all the stuff that they do in the Dara Mabel, and the humans that are building a bridge to heaven, right? They're building a tower to heaven. Those are people with plans. Those are people with dreams. Those are people with motivation, with yuzma. These are people that have something going on for them. And those are people who have not, what he calls now, have not found a tikkun, right? Have not found a way to deal with their potential, have not found a way to actualize what they need to be. And that's humanity. That's humanity that we're dealing with. And now we got to find a way to deal with it. And we've got to find a better way to deal with it than Dara Mabel and Dara Fluga and Siddim and who knows who else. Because those ways were obviously destructive, right? And the very important thing to notice here is that Arizal doesn't blame them. Very important to note that he's not playing the blame game. He's not doing the moral thing that most medrash is doing always, right? Like here we learn that you shouldn't be like Saddam, you shouldn't be like the Dara Mabel. Of course you shouldn't. I mean, that's not the point. But that's not how he thinks of the stories. And number one, he thinks of these stories as all versions of the same thing. They're just humanity V1, humanity V2, and humanity V3. And it's all the same one, the same people, the same Demolition, which includes all humanity, right? The same humanity trying to become what it needs to be. And it tries. And since it tries, and since it's not easy, it's a big job, it's a big dream, it doesn't succeed. And the Arizal says explicitly in all of these things, and it's known, I don't know if it's known to everyone, but it's known to the people who study Arizal in Chassidus and certain ways. It's known to certain researchers that everything that Arizal says about all of this is trying to explain himself, right? He's trying to explain his generation. He's trying to explain ourselves to us, or us to ourselves. And he really sees it like this, that Arizal gave his own students this kind of explanation. He said, well, if you find yourself struggling with all kinds of things, and you should know that it's natural, because all souls start in the klipot. That's his language. All souls starts in the klipot, and this is the story that I was giving here, in some particular version of it. All souls start there, and you've got to get out of it. And the way that Arizal's pshat and David and Shaul is this. In any case, is the reason some people have it harder and some people have it easier, just because the people that have it easier are up to a later stage in their process. In other words, and this is important, the way he describes, and this is true for this description that we're giving from the Demolition until the yetzias mitzrayim and further, but it's still true nowadays, and it's true in detail and in general too, is that there's a procession, there's a progress, right? There's a certain kind of progress that keeps on going on from the original, just pure power, pure potential, pure chaos, and into making a mensch out of it, right? Into making something out of it. And this process is mostly a matter of time, or at least it can be described as a matter of time, right? If you're starting, and he gives the metaphor, and in just yetzias mitzrayim, he gives the metaphor of someone mining for gold and trying to purify gold out of the rocks and stones and all other metals and other kind of things that are mixed into it. You sort of start with one big mush, one big mess, and slowly you take off bigger chunks of rocks and you find one piece of gold and you put it on the side, and then you purify that even more, and you put it into all kinds of fires and all kinds of tools that purify it, all kinds of chemical reactions or whatever it is that you do, and slowly it gets purer and purer and purer. But the earlier you're on the process, the more problems you were to expect, the more impurities you should expect to find. And if you expect to find, in other words, if someone starts digging into his soul and finds a bunch of impurities in it, it's not to be surprised. That's just a sign that it's the beginning of a process. That you're the first one that touched this, that found this mine. If there's many people have been there, then it might be already purified that you would expect. And since it's purified, you might found very little gold because there's very little left to do. But since you're just starting, so Arizal says people that seem to have less problems with the yetzer hara or with whatever human evils, are just people that are in a later step of the process. And of course, since there's more than one life, so not everything starts in each time you're born, or maybe there's a general progress in human culture in different ways. So that's why people seem to be born at different stages in the process. But in the basic sense, this is important, a very important way of thinking. In the basic sense, there's no difference between a tzaddik and a rasha, right? They're not different kind of people. They're just people at different stages in the purification process. This is very important, and it's even true for the matzilas. I can't get to that. But we're talking about neshamas today. This is true for all people. So, and this was quoted explicitly by Reb Tzedek HaKayan and others to explain what's going on nowadays, but it's always the same story, right? The more interesting stuff you have going on, the more crazy stuff you can have going on, and that's all the same thing. And the more it gets purified or gets mivura, right? It gets clarified. It's just steps in the same stages of the same process. So going to back to our story of Demolition. So Demolition gave birth to all these shaidim. In other words, to all these souls, right? There might be the souls might be at some point literally animating shaidim, but they're all these souls that are not yet sure what to do with their life, right? And those are the souls of the Ramab, and those are the souls of the Raflag, and those are the souls of Saddam. And those are the souls of Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. Now what this does is that it changes the story. It changes very much, like we read the story, we read Sefer Bereshis and Shemos as a series of tzaddikim versus Rishaim. There's Noach, the good guy, and the Mabel, the bad guy. There's Avram, the good guy, and Aflug, the good bad guys, and Saddam, the bad guys, and I don't know who's the good guy and the bad guys between Yosef and his brothers, and there's Mitzrayim, the bad guys, and the Yidden, the good guys, and so on. And the Arizal tells you that, wait a minute, that's not really what happened. And the reason why he says this is, one implication of what happens when you think this way is that now you sort of understand all the problems that happen to these people. Because if you think that we're the good guys, but somehow we found ourselves in exile, somehow we found ourselves struggling, somehow we found ourselves suffering, or somehow we found ourselves sinning, which is sort of the same thing as suffering. And you're like, wait, what happened? This is not fear. But if you change your whole picture, you change your whole framing, and you say, well, there's this big chunk of stuff, coal and diamonds mixed up, right? There's this big chunk of stuff called humanity. And it all goes back to our first human, but again, doesn't change much if it's the first or the second. That's the idea. And this stuff is what expresses itself in all of these different bad and good ways. And now we've got a problem. We've got a challenge. And there's one challenge. The challenge is how to get from humans to people, to Jews, really. In other words, what he sees as Yisrael, what's called yetzias Yisrael min mitzrayim, Beis Yaakov Hamlez. What does Yisrael mean? Right? So we say, Bereishis b'shvel Yisrael shenikra reishis. We say, Atem kriyim Adam. And for some weird reason, people tend to read it backwards. They say, okay, so therefore, only Jews are human and everyone else is somehow not. And what are they? But I think that what this is saying, and when the Hadarid explains it explicitly, what it's saying is precisely the opposite. What it's saying is, you only have to be Adam. There's no such a thing. If someone asks you, what is Torah, what is Yisrael? You have to tell him Adam. Well, of course, Adam is an incomplete project. The project of creating humanity, well, it was first creation by Hashem, created Adam. That project went bad one way. Then the second level of project where Hashem commanded Adam and gave him a bracha and told him he will create more people. That went wrong in a million ways. Right? Every time they create a new person, there's a new way of being evil. Right? That's one of the reasons we're so happy when a child is born. Like, this guy is going to be able to figure out a new craziness. Anyways. And what we call Yisrael is just the correct way of being Adam, right? Now, of course, that doesn't mean being born to the right mother. There's nothing good about being born to the right mother. It means acting in a certain way or being a certain way. Acting is not enough. You have to be in a certain way. And part of being in a certain way is, of course, being in a certain society that's set up in a certain way, being in a certain culture, all of that. But it's all about making the Adam. So in other words, there's not a story. There's not a story of two people always. There's not a story of Cain versus Hevel. There's not a story of Adam versus animals. I don't even know. There's not a story of, Yisrael versus Adam. There's not such a story. There's a story of Adam, of Zera Adam. And there's a story of how to purify and how to create that Zera Adam into a mensch, called the Yid, called Atem Kriyam Adam. Right? The Adam who is correct is Atem Kriyam Adam. And now, well, you ask me, okay, but isn't the whole story? So now you can understand, this is one thing. This is actually the real answer. And this is why we have the Golus Mitzrayim, because one of the ways, and this is a bad way, it's not a good way, it's a harsh way, and we need to have an explanation for why even this way happens. But at least one of the ways in which people become good is by suffering, by being the underdog, by being the one enslaved. And somehow that somehow makes people better, at least prepares them. It's not really make them better. It's another discussion, but we have this concept of Yisirim Mechaprim. It's supposed to make them better. It kind of could. In other words, it's obviously true that historically, since, according to the story, since they were enslaved in Egypt, there was an opportunity, right? Maisha was able to take them out and start turning them into what they need to be. So that's why. And that's why it happened. And that's the meaning of it. In other words, I don't know if that's why. That's the meaning of what happened. The meaning of this surah is not, well, we did something wrong and therefore we're the bad guys and then we became the good guys. So then the whole story doesn't make sense. What's happening is that there's this thing called humans, and some of those humans, at least we got to start somewhere. Some of them, we have to start the process of purification of humanity. And one of the ways of purifying people is by Golus. It's a way. It works. Somewhat works. Right? I mean, yeah. Even in the it's made us better people in some ways, being Golus. And being out of Golus does not, whatever. I'm not getting into that. Point is, it's a real way of making them better. And that's a story, and they quote the Pusuk Kira Barzel, which can be read as this. Look, Kira Barzel is a furnace for iron, or a furnace for gold, where the gold becomes purified and hardened and so on, and clarified. And that's what Mitzrayim was for. This isn't totally, I have to make it very clear, it's totally amoral description, right? There's a project called humanity. It needs to, amoral in our sense, really moral. And in other words, it's not a story of we were bad and we sinned and therefore we got punished and all of that. Maybe that's the story of being punished also, but it's a story of how do we make humans into humans, and this is the way. And now there's a very important point here. which is that this leads to the conclusion that, just like we explained, that the difference between Dara Mabel and Dara Midbar is just a matter of time. It's a matter of how many times did they go through. The first time they tried, they got a Mabel on themselves. The second time they tried, they got mitzrayim on themselves. And the third time, or in the end of mitzrayim, they got out of mitzrayim. They got the Torah. So just different madurot, different versions of the same person trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and succeeding. And every time he failed, something was succeeded in that also, right? That's what we call Noach, for example, in Dara Mabel, and what we call Loit in Sodom, and so on. There's always some kind, it's not like a total failure. There's something happened. Even when the Demolition was Parish Maisha and it was a total failure, he gave birth to these also. He did something. Well, they're not full, not complete, they're not wholly where they need to be, but there's something, they exist. It's better than not existing, or more than not existing. And that means that the difference between Yisrael and Mitzrayim, we say, well, what do you mean this is all really weird pshat? In other words, it's not only weird, and this is why I'm going back to what I started in the yesterday and the thing about how the Sod reorganizes the pshat. This is not weird, because, okay, we thought that the Mitzrayim were the bad people, and they were the good people, or the Mabel were the bad people, and Noach was the good people, or whatever, and now you're telling me some other thing, or you're giving me saying that it was a Gilgal, and how could it's not his fault that there was a Gilgal, all kind of questions like that. And we always thought that, the whole story is that we prevailed over the Egyptians, at least, right? They were the bad guys, and Pari at least was the bad guy, exactly, and we got out of them, and that seems to be unlike the whole story that we're told. And the answer is correct, but that's a matter of time. The Mitzrayim, by their choice, or by collective choice, or by individual choice, there's a whole discussion about this, right? There was Yorias Hashem Avdei Pare, there was Yev, and there was Pare himself, and there was Avdei Pare. You have to get into all these details. But in the most general sense, the Mitzrayim are not at the stage to be redeemed. In other words, Yisrael Yatzu Mitzrayim is not because the Mitzrayim are just the bad guys and didn't have to get out. Mitzrayim is just a way of saying neshamas that from other nations' times have to be purified, have to become something. And at that stage in time, the Mitzrayim were the ones doing the purification by way of Yisurim Achaprim, by way of putting us in Gullus. And we were the ones being purified. And obviously they didn't get purified by that. That's not a very purificatory act, to harass other people and to enslave them. Okay. But they could have, and they will, eventually, slowly, next week or next year. The Shana Abba B'Yerushalayim. The Shana Abba, the Mitzrayim will also be Yisrael. And this is not a story that I'm like a made-up story, like maybe Mashiach times or something. This is a pasuk. Because the pasuk says that when Yidden left Mitzrayim, v'gam erev rav ula itam. In other words, there were a bunch of Mitzrayim, or Rashi says Tarevis Shalemais, a bunch of other people, Goyim, that actually went out of Mitzrayim along with us. And doesn't say much about it. This is one of the big mysteries. I gave a class in Hanukkah about not saying that there are bad Jews. And many people asked me about the Erev Rav, and they asked me about this Medrash about Echad Mechameshim and so on. So now there's the correct answer for this, or the traditional answer to this, which is that the Erev Rav is a big problem. In other words, and Arizal talks about it a lot, Nazar talks about it, and many people, again, find in this story, and Arizal saying that this shows that Yidden don't have problems, only Goyim have problems, and Nazar says, well, that's why there was an Egel, and all the problems of the Midbar, there's different Yukim and Am, and so on, that was made by the Erev Rav. So in other words, it's always the people with Jewish mothers that are good, and people with non-Jewish mothers that are bad. But that's not what's going on. It's the opposite. And the Arizal says explicitly that's the opposite. The Arizal says, so why did Maisha take out the Erev Rav from Mitzrayim? Why did he deal with them? And who knows if we're not their descendants? I mean, I don't know. We don't really know what happened or how to describe what happened. It seems to be reasonable to assume that at least part, and we have to get into discussion of Shvatim and whatever, but at least part of the Jewish nation today are the Egyptians that when they changed sides at some point in the Makkas or after the Makkas or whenever, they changed sides and they went over to Maisha's side. I mean, it's Sikkim and Fereshim that some Egyptians went over to Maisha's side, right? And it becomes a very big question, again, both as an explanation of the historical story and something very relevant. The Arizal does say, and the Zohar does say, that this was what caused Maisha to die in the Midbar, this is what caused all the problems, the Erev Rav. But he explicitly says that Maisha had to do it. And why did he have to do it? For the same logic that we discussed. For the same reason that the Arizal says explicitly, Yidden and Mitzrayim were Goy Bekerev Goy. Right? Goy Mekarev Goy, it says, Hanisalim Lechach, Goy Mekarev Goy, which Arizal says they were both Goyim. That's how he reads it. Two Goyim, Yidden and Mitzrayim were both Goyim. And not only that, one Goy was in the other Goy. But one Goy was a purified Goy, and the other Goy was a to be purified Goy. And now Erev Rav, people, and the Arizal and the Zohar both read in a lot more of the Erev Rav story into the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and of the Arizal literally says that Parai, when he says in Am B'nai Yisrael, the first thing that we discussed earlier, that he was worried about the demographic threat, about there being too many Yidden. He's really talking about the Erev Rav, because there were not so many Yidden. The Arizal says that. Very amazing pshat. There were not so many. 600,000, how many are there? But the fact that they have influence on a bunch of mitzrayim, that's a problem. And it goes back to Yosef, it goes back, way back to Yaakov. In other words, there was always a universal mission of even the Yidden Mitzrayim were making mitzrayim into Yidden. And so then why we call some of them Yisrael and some of them Erev Rav? So Arizal says, Erev Rav is just a name for the ones that are holding 2 weeks early in the process, right? If you're somewhat earlier in the process, so you're going to be less pure, less clear. And it's like simple, things take time. So discuss, things take time. So, well, the Yidden started their story at the Avram Avinu's times 400 years ago, or level of 400 years ago. And the Ritzim started 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, whenever they decided to go over to Maisha's side. And it takes time for them to learn how to be a mensch. It doesn't happen in one minute. And because of that, so in other words, again, it's not a blame game. It's not about finding someone outside to blame. And the Arizal says, why did Moshe have to take that Erev Rav? Because they were him. As Moshe was like Adam, was some part of Adam, or the Das, whatever. And the Erev Rav were literally part of him. He could not be mevater on them. He could not leave them more than he could leave a part of himself. In other words, more than he could leave the Yidden. They're the same. They're the same thing. Moshe is their leader. Moshe, the way he describes Moshe is the Das, and they're his children. The Moshe is like Adam, and these are his children, his Keri, his incomplete children, his Shedim children. But you can't leave your children either. Adam Rishon gave birth to Shedim. That doesn't give him a license to not pay them child support. You have to support them too. And if a father gives birth to a bad son, that's not an excuse. It's still his responsibility. And not only is it his responsibility, when you give birth to a son who's not completely what you want him to be, that means it's just a way of showing or seeing that there's some incompleteness in you. There's some part that didn't yet achieve their potential, not yet mevurah, right? Some yetzias that still have what to do. And now it's your job to take care of them. And that's why Moshe, all of his life, and not only that, there's the whole difference between Moshe and Noach, where Noach had this shitta that, I don't know, I can't influence on the whole world, I could take care of myself, and I'll build a teva, and this Zohar says that's right, and the Zohar says that's why it was Noach's fault that there was a Mabel, Noach. And Moshe had the opposite shitta. And Moshe's shitta was, I'm going to be mekarev everyone, including the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were Moshe's people. That's why it says, Lech red keshiches amcha. Amcha, your nation, not mine. I'm dealing with the people that we've purified yesterday. Those are called B'nai Yisrael. And they didn't do the egel. But Maisha, you have to. It's not like you did a mistake. It was a mistake in the sense, like all mistakes, like even Chata Demolition. It's only a mistake in the sense of it being in the incorrect time, right? Achla paga. If you eat a fruit when it's not ready, it doesn't taste very well. So if you try to do tshuva before you're ready to do tshuva, it doesn't give good results. That's basically the whole idea of all these things. But you can't really leave it. You can't give up on it. You're giving up on it would be giving up on part of yourself. And not only would it be giving up on part of yourself, it would be like what happened in some plans. It would be ruining the whole mission. Because now Moshe's mission would become just to help a few people of his family. That was not his mission. His mission was to help other Maisha. His mission was to save the soul. His mission was to complete and fix this Nitzotzis of Adam Maisha. And that job wasn't finished until this day. That's why we have everything that started from all the things that we see right away when they go to mitzrayim. It's not so simple. We're not really such good people, right? Because we're still somewhat mitzrayim. We're still not entirely. We're much better than we were before. We're not having a marvel anymore, but we're not much better either. And that's another way of saying we're still Erev Rav. And Erev Rav is just one level, right? We're still Para. Even Para himself needs to do tshuva. And Maisha Rabbeinu says this openly. He says, Gam ata titem biyadenu oiles es v'chem v'asinu l'Hashem elakani. Para says, I'll never let you go. Why are you even talking to me? You should give up on me. I'm the Yetzara, I'm the Sitra Achra. You should figure it out yourself. And Moshe says, no. Not only am I not giving up on my people, I'm not even giving up on you. You will be over this Hashem just like I am. When? Today, tomorrow, next week. It's all a matter of time. we have the cats, right? There's one left. Knowing the correct time for doing things is the whole trick. But what this means is that the difference, and I'm going to finish with this, the difference between a Yid and a Goy, the difference between a Tzaddik and a Rasha, which are sort of the same thing, are differences of time. Or then there might be a lot of time. Like some people or some person is a long time, has been through a lot of levels of bitter, a lot of levels of tzidif, a lot of levels of purification. And now we say that he's a tzaddik and the other guy is the Rasha. But it's not a real thing. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that most understood this, right? And the Arizal says that's why Moshe and Bilam were the same thing, because they're the same exact thing, just the wrong side of that. The one that's not yet. And end of the day, we'll have to take care of Bilam too. And the Arizal says, amazing pshat, I have to finish with this. He says, amazing pshat. Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of Parshas Boy, Hashem tells him to tell the Yidden about Kedushas B'chayr, Kadosh Li Kol B'chayr. And Maisha goes, V'yem Moshe La'am, Zechor es hayom hazeh she'itosem mitzrayim. And it's a kasha, all the Bala, everyone reads the Chumash as this kasha. He says different things. He says things that Hashem told him a week before, much before. Which then he didn't say it for some reason. But he says the whole different things. He says them the whole mitzvah of matzah and Pesach, Chag HaMatzos really. And only after does he go and say Kadosh Li Kol B'chayr. So why is he doing this? The Arizal has an amazing pshat. The Arizal says that Moshe Rabbeinu, it says V'yem Moshe La'am, and we have this klal that Ha'am is always the Erev Rav. Ha'am, the people. The Bnei Yisrael, there's sometimes the Am, there's sometimes Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael means the literal descendants of Yisrael, and Am is Erev Rav. In other words, the Jewish nation, right, the Jewish family, but not Bnei Yisrael. It's two different things. Amazing diak, if you might be even 12 people shot somewhere. And the Arizal says Moshe Rabbeinu got this message from Hashem. You should tell them about Kedushas B'chayrim. And he was thinking, wait, I'm going to go to my people, my friends, my blood, right? And I'll tell them this, and they'll feel very bad, because B'chayrim is not something that's relevant to Erev Rav. The whole thing of B'chayrim, why not? Not because they're not holy enough to have the mitzvah or something like that. Well, very simply, because the whole logic is Kli Kal B'chayr, because the B'chayrim of the mitzvah died and the B'chayrim of the didn't die. Or the B'chayrim of the Erev Rav, either they did die or they didn't die, I don't know, but they're not the ones that it's referring to the story, right? It's the story is referring to these people that had Kedushas B'chayr. Or maybe you need to literally be a Yid, but that's really what it means. So I can't talk about Makas B'chayres. And the opposite, like it says, by the way, this is an amazing radical Gemara. It says, Ager ad asura doros, until the 10th generation, you should not tell Ager how bad, you should not make fun of a guy in front of him, right? Yeah, and it's put in Parshas Yisro, right? And yeah, okay, it's a lot of nice sensitivity. But what it's really saying is, well, we're all gerim ad asura doros. I mean, I don't know how many doros, right? When you said mitchilav I don't know how we have the guts to do that, because it's like part of us, so we're making fun of ourselves. That's okay. If you're doing it to someone else, you can't do it, right? Like you can't tell about shuvah. But another way of saying it is that there's always levels of purification, and again, it's just one kind of tshuva, right? And if it takes more than 10 generations for all the impurities to go away. Not because he was born wrongly, because you could read it culturally or however you want. It takes a very long time. Until 10th generation, he's still somewhat a guy. And he's about as a Yid. You have to be nice to him. The Yiddish guy. You have to be nice to him. And so you can't go against Goyim to him. And Moshe Rabbeinu is, and another way of saying this, in other words, another correct way of saying this would be you can't put demands on people which are 2 steps beyond them, right? Of course, you should not be even that level of goy. But that can be for the 11th generation's work. That's not his work. His work is to be less. I read the Medrash says, some guy said that again, if he doesn't do one mitzvah, then he doesn't get. Another guy said, what do you want from the guy? His father was Aved Zera. You should appreciate him. And this is what Maisha is saying. Maisha says, first let's talk about something that's relevant to everyone. Everyone went out of Mitzrayim, we should remember this forever. And Pesach, right? Pesach is not the time that we say we're the Yidden and we're not Gerim. It's this time when we say everyone that came along can have a Pesach. Right? You can't be oral, you have to be a bris milah, you have to do the mitzvah. But you don't have to be born to the right mother. Right? So that's what he says. And only afterwards does he tell them the Kedushas B'chayrim. So that's, it tells for the Yid and not for the Erev Rav. In other words, next week you'll be there. Right? At some point you'll be there. Or, well, the literal Kedushas B'chayrim, if it's Mamish Tilian, if they were by Makas B'chayris or not, or whatever it is. But he starts off with talking to his people. So that's the general story of why the Yidden and the Mitzrayim are really the same people. And the story of the Erev Rav shows this. And therefore, this is the story until this day. It didn't stop, right? You could read it in a personal sense, right? You're good and you're bad are the same person, so don't make fun of him. And in a general sense, right, where the humanity hadn't stopped, and all the stories that we tell about the Demolition are still going on. We're still eating from that Adas, and we're still having Netetis Keriev, Kiflamet Shana, and we're still having all these things, and we're still having Dora Mabel, Dora Fluga, Dora Anshistam, all these things still exist. And we're still all the people that are somewhat, in other words, the people that it's interesting to talk about, at least, are the ones that are pushed in all these directions. Like, you want to be like a Mabel. Like, there should, I'm not going to describe what the Mabel thought, but they were right. Like, they had a point. Like, this should be only love and whatever. And he should also be Dara Floga. Like, we should actually build a bridge to heaven. Like, that seems to be like the correct thing to do. And we should also have like a real society like Saddam. Like, this shouldn't be Chachmas. In any case, we should do all these things. Or we should do them in the correct way. And that's why we're so messed up, because we're still like in the middle of doing tshuva. Like, we're still those 130 years where we're not really fully human. And yetzias mitzrayim, and that's why the ultimate yetzias mitzrayim, and that's why Arizal's pshat, by the way, very important. That's why we talk about yetzias mitzrayim more than we talk about other things. Yetzias mitzrayim created something that touches the ultimate thing. In other words, since at least for these people that went out of Mitzrayim, the Yidden and the Erev, right? For both of them, it's something that doesn't go back. It created a new kind of person, and at least that for that level, for that sense, maybe for those people or for that level of those people, that's something that's finished. We just talked about this in a different class. And that's why we say that Mitzrayim, but this is different than all the other things, like went out of Buval, went out of other places, where we're still sort of entirely there. But we're sort of somewhat entirely not in Mitzrayim. And that symbolizes when we talk about the Gula Sida, is that everyone has to go out of Mitzrayim, right? Not only the Mitzrayim have to get out of Mitzrayim too. And when the Mitzrayim got out of Mitzrayim, that will be Yetzias Mitzrayim number 2, for real. That will be the real Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's why when we talk about the future, or about the ultimate Mashiach, we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't talk about Yetzias Ba'as Shani or whatever, because those were, again, playing little, very small games with 500 people or whatever, certain people. That's not the point. The whole idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim was to do something total. And of course, it wasn't entirely total. It was total for one people, or total for one day, or total for one aspect of one people. Not okay, whatever, however we describe it. I'm not in details of that. But that's the whole why Yetzias Mitzrayim is real. And the only other thing that can be real is when the whole world can go out of Mitzrayim. And that would be, like the Arizal calls it, Bala Mavas L'Netzach. There would be no death, or there would be no Ra in any people. Okay?